This is the Observations Podcast for Friday, the 30th of April, 2023. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Dale Franks.
I'm Michael Wade.
And we have a bit to talk about. I know there's that news story about that shooting in Texas.
Yeah.
That is so iffy. It is still kind of breaking. I'm not sure I'm comfortable discussing it this week.
It's kind of hard to get a handle on it because everything's kind of iffy right now. They still haven't found the guy. And I do know that they have identified the guy from one of those Ring doorbells. He was next door neighbor. So they have an ID, but we still don't know what happened.
Yeah, well, here's a pro tip, kids. Don't get into arguments with your neighbors.
Yeah. Especially in Texas.
Well, you know what? Anywhere, any argument, because, traditionally the idea was most murders are committed by someone you know. A surprising number of them are committed by neighbors because of some long-standing dispute that nobody wants to back away from. And you just don't piss off your neighbors. If for no other reason, it's not like you can get away from them. You now both own property next to each other. So either have no contact whatsoever with your neighbors other than minimal contact, or ensure that they're the closest friends that you'll ever have. But anything in the middle is pretty much rife with danger.
Yeah, there's this old case from Virginia where, how they say good fences make good neighbors. Ironically, this lawyer lived next door to a farm. The farmer's cows kept coming into the lawyer's property. So he erected a fence to keep the cows out and then sent a $10,000, $15,000 bill to his neighbor, which was legal.
Yes, and because he was a lawyer, right, he thought, well, there's nothing wrong with this at all. Right. This is how the law works.
The farmer took issue and ended up killing him.
Yeah. The law may avenge you, but chances are it's not going to protect you. So anyway, I guess the thing with this thing in Texas is the reporting is, and Lord knows you can't depend on anything for the first 48 hours.
No.
But the reporting is that the person that they've identified is indeed an illegal alien who has been deported twice before. So shouldn't have had a gun in the first place. But again, not confirmed. We don't really know anything about that. So While it would be interesting to talk about, and certainly in terms of the context of the Second Amendment stuff that's going on, I think in terms of that, we probably just need to table that specific discussion over that specific incident and just move on to something else.
Yeah, I think that's right, because it's just not enough to know right now.
But it's something I want to talk about because of what else happened this week. So not the shooting itself. That's just kind of a lead-in, honestly, because we don't know enough about that story. But the interesting thing is the testimony that's been going on for the last week and a half by the ATF and by DHS in front of Congress about the entire, ATF has just gone off the rails. So there is a firearms company that had these little, I guess they were like brushed aluminum business cards. And what they had on their business card is they had a template for two little pieces of metal. Now, this is not something that you could cut out of their business card. It wasn't like it was punched so that you could just pop them out, like a pre-built piece. It was just literally the images of these two pieces of metal. Now, what these two pieces of metal do for some models of AR-15s is that you can sort of insert them over the existing semi-auto fire control group. And it essentially performs as an auto sear. So the bolt cycles back, and again, it depends on the type of AR-15 you have and whether it uses the M16 style bolt carrier, which has a little notch on the bottom of it, which is what activates the auto sear in M16 fire group. And so what this does is it kind of, with these two pieces of metal that you kind of punch out, and one has to slide into slide tab A into slot B. And what it makes is kind of a poor man's, if you make it with the appropriate type of metal, a poor man's auto sear. So for those AR-15s that happen to have the M16 style bolt that is automatic capable with the appropriate fire group, what it allows you to do is fire that M16 full auto. Now, this is just a little business card. It's like a brushed aluminum card. It just happens to have the outlines of these two pieces of metal etched into it. The guy that produced these business cards, the guy that runs this company, has now been convicted and is facing 10 years in jail for disseminating machine gun parts.
What?
Yeah, exactly. The ATF says that those are machine gun parts, presumably because someone could take his little metal business card, I guess, put him into a jig and very carefully cut out. And I'm not even entirely sure that the pictures of the template, the machining template, not even entirely sure that they are perfectly to scale.
I would think they wouldn't be.
However, they do take up the entire, sort of front of the card. And so anyway, even though they are not pre-punched bits or anything, they're literally just sort of the etched outlines of these items that would have to be milled properly to actually work as part of this card. They're saying, well, you're distributing machine gun parts. And he got convicted in federal court this week. And so now he's facing 10 years in prison for disseminating machine gun parts under the National Firearms Act of 1936.
Yeah, sounds suspect.
Yeah, you would think. I mean, you would think that he would have, at the very least, a First Amendment defense, because what he is disseminating are pictures. Granted, they may be life-size and they may be workable if you were to cut them out, although I think it'd probably be more trouble than it would be worth to cut them out of that.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine that kind of metal would hold up for very long.
Yeah, well, whether it would or not, it's now an illegal machine gun part. And so they've been convicted. And the ATF has done a couple of things very similar to this in terms of going after, and now we're not talking about just going after gun owners, although they certainly do that. And they tried that with their bump stock ban and all the other things. And yet Congress doesn't seem, willing or able to put them under control for that. And then this week, when they were talking to the guy at the ATF who is in charge of all this stuff, and they were asking him, the Republicans anyway, were asking him specific questions about firearms, he basically told them, oh, shut up. I don't know anything about guns.
Yeah.
I'm just the administrator. So whenever my experts tell me I got to do something, I just do it.
Yeah, he was pathetic. That was scary. I mean, he literally, and he's not the only one. It's like the guy they put up for, was it the FAA? Knew nothing about flying, didn't have a pilot's license. I mean, literally knew nothing about aviation whatsoever.
Well, if you go back a month ago, whenever the Senate Judiciary Committee was asking Biden nominee things, judicial nominees, judges, what is Article 3 of the Constitution?
I'm not recalling Article 3. That has not come before me in my practice.
I shouldn't think that is true, but okay. We are not sending our best and brightest to Washington, clearly. And one of the dangers of the administrative state that we have built is the fact that these incompetents become captive to the departments that they are nominally to oversee. They don't have the knowledge required to run those departments. Pete Buttigieg. And so therefore their, pronouncements are, for people who do know, they just seem wacky. And the cases that they pursue, like this poor guy who just had the picture of these two AR-15 add-on parts on a aluminum business card. This guy's now this is not just they're violating our rights. They're sending this guy to jail for perhaps 10 years.
I mean, the guy was kind of stupid for putting that on the business card. I mean, that has no legitimate use. I mean, that's clearly going to invite scrutiny, but
Actually, he actually came out publicly prior to and said, "Yeah, I'm doing this intentionally."
okay, well,
He did admit, "I am poking the bear."
okay, well, bear bites back. Um, but either way, you said that these administrative state people are incompetent. Well, it depends on what you think they're supposed to be competent at. If they're competent at pushing DEI, um, critical race theory, and all these other transgenderism and all the other stupid ideologies,
Yeah,
I
well,
bet that they could answer those questions,
that is
like
the
an absolute master.
yeah, that is the issue, isn't it?
And they're not, the powers that be are not concerned with actual competence in the jobs that they're hired for. They're concerned with competence and pushing their agenda, and that's all they really care about.
It's I guess the mindset is almost okay. Well, the agencies can pretty much run themselves. I mean, they have professionals. They've worked there for 25, 30 years. So yeah, everything below the appointed official level, they're the ones who know everything. The problem is, and by the way, you'll never see this more clearly demonstrated than in the 1980s BBC television show Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister, where these civil servant guys know that the political appointees are only temporary. And they know that they're going to be sliding off into a year or two into some other job. And the way that they have constructed, in the context of the TV show, the ministries, but I can't believe that American cabinet departments work any differently. The executive departments have the same sort of people, and I'm sure that their primary interest is doing whatever their department wants to do, irrespective of the political appointee who is putatively in charge of it. That is right. Even more true if you're going to put people in charge of an agency who don't actually know anything about the technical work that agency does. What that invites is for the most committed and most activist people to rise to the top of those agencies and then to take control of the policy, irrespective of the political policy of the administration. Now, in this case, I happen to think that the policy that the ATF is pursuing is very consonant with the Biden administration's desire to undercut the Second Amendment. But the extraordinary danger of hiring people who are incompetent over at the ministry or department that they're supposed to be running, that's a very dangerous precedent, because what it allows is the department to become activist and to pursue its own policy goals, almost to the exclusion of whoever their political masters are supposed to be.
Well, and it leads directly to political persecution, because that's who the ones that have actual criminal referral power, and some of them even have the power to try cases in their own right. But that's what it leads to. It leads to political persecution and political prisoners. It's inevitable. And as a matter of fact, that's kind of the whole point, to use the power of the state against the state's enemies.
I was just thinking of, I forget who came up with the saying, but it was in terms of policy and following government policy, and the gist of it is government is the organization that comes up with policies so good that it requires force to impose on society.
It's such a great idea that we're going to force you to use it.
And that's exactly what we're seeing at the ATF level. And then you look at the people who run the ATF, and look, going above that, going to DHS and going to Mr. Mayorkas, right, who's the secretary of the DHS. He's right. just he's a dolt.
Yeah.
And
he's not, he is there to do exactly what the Biden administration wants, which is essentially nothing. And to toe the administration line. He's been great at that. He's been taking all kinds of heat. I can't believe he hasn't resigned yet. Um, and I know that it's probably useless to impeach him, but if anybody is impeachable, it's this guy. He's clearly not doing his job. He lies to Congress constantly, telling us that the border's secure.
Yeah.
We do not have operational control over the border, unless by operational control you mean letting as many people in as possible.
Yeah, it's obvious. Oh, and by the way, when Title 42 expires, assuming that the Biden administration lets it.
When is that, Monday?
Yeah. I mean, there is reportedly, and I haven't been down there myself, so I can neither confirm or deny the accuracy of this, but reportedly there are tens, perhaps hundreds of thousands of people who are just milling around waiting for this to expire to come across the border.
I expect that's true. Why not? I mean, the incentive's there.
And one of the numbers I've heard is like 700,000.
That much? Holy crap.
That sounds like a lot of people. I don't know where they're all camping out or what have you. But they are, what do they do? Eagle Pass, Texas, which is always the sort of the poster child for this, a city of in southern Texas on the border of 36,000 people, have at any given time 20 to 30,000 illegal immigrants there in the city as well. Usually transient, but basically their population doubles, and 2,000-3,000 people are coming across just in that tiny sector of the border alone daily.
Yeah. I mean, and how do you handle that? I mean, it just overwhelms the services. New York City is complaining about the like 6,000, however many it's been, illegals that have been shipped there, and how they're getting overwhelmed. Like, are you kidding me?
What?
New York City.
Yeah, a city that has declared itself a
sanctuary
for illegal immigrants. Okay, cry me a river.
Yeah.
You're lucky that people aren't sending more. I mean, you're the sanctuary. You're the ones who want to take care of them. And now in a city of 8 million people, an additional, in 6,000, 7,000 people are now just overstressing your social services. Well, it sounds like you need to overhaul your social services. And it sounds like you need to get more to get a taste of what it's like living in Eagle Pass or southern Arizona.
Right. I mean, the comparisons are just monstrous. I mean, doubling your population versus a drop in the bucket of a city of 8 million people. I mean, it doesn't even compute. And yet they're the ones that push these policies. Yes, we love illegal immigrants. Yes, we're a sanctuary city. Nobody is illegal.
And
river.
The question that I have is just why? Why? I mean, outside of a generalized compassion for people who are trying to escape countries that are mired in the case of Mexico, for example, horrific corruption, crime, and poverty. I can see why you'd want to leave. But that doesn't give you carte blanche just to go to any place that you want to go. Well, it does in the case of the Democrats, who apparently, out of the 7.2 billion people that exist on the planet, the only people who aren't allowed to exert any control over who goes to their country, the only people who are left out of that decision are the citizens of the United States of America. The other 7.2 billion people can just, do whatever they want, apparently. And then when they get here, it's all catch and release, basically, from the Border Patrol. And, okay, here's your court date, which is, 8 months away, 14 months away. And then they're just released into the interior. This catch and release thing has been going on for a couple of years now. What is the point of the policy? In two senses. Number one, in what sense is it in the interests of the United States to let an untrammeled flow of immigrants to come into the United States? Or rather, in whose Americans' interest is it in? Because it is certainly not in the interest.
Cui bono, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. Because it is certainly not in the interests of low skilled or minority workers
That's right.
who see downward pressure on their wages. And by the way, it's not in the interest of the average working person in the United States who also see downward pressures on their wages, unwelcome at a time when we've been running above 5% inflation for a year and a half now. In whose interest is it to just allow this untrammeled migration of workers, however many are workers, we can certainly quibble about, to come across the border? Because if you're looking at the average person, it's difficult to see how it's in their interest.
Even Cesar Chavez, that great pre-Reaganite Reaganite,
California's labor leader of farm workers, largely Hispanic in California.
and he recognized how much it hurt the people he represented for illegal immigration to be tolerated. He was highly against it. Matter of fact, kind of brutally against it at times. So we know that who it hurts. Who does it help? Well, clearly the Chamber of Commerce class of businesses that see the chance to get not only cheap labor, but also, like you said, tamp down on the labor they're paying for anyway. They benefit.
Now, okay, let's stop right there and let's investigate that. First of all, how do they benefit? I mean, technically, it's illegal to hire any of these illegal aliens to do anything. And by the way, I'm using the term illegal aliens with sort of malice aforethought. That is the actual term in U.S. immigration law.
That's correct.
That is the statutory term. Therefore, it is the term I'm going to use, irrespective of how triggering it might be. And the fact is, it's illegal to hire illegal aliens.
That's right. Except it has to be enforced, and it's rarely ever enforced. So they benefit in that way. They also benefit in the fact that people they can hire are seeing, competition from those illegal immigrants, and it forces their wages lower. It retards their ability to demand more money because obviously there's a much bigger supply of low skilled labor. So that's how it helps the business class. It helps the Democrats in that, these people are voting, at least some subset of them are. And that's what they want. They want new voters. They want to overwhelm the system with a bunch of people who will, vote their way. Now, that hasn't always worked out for them, as we saw in 2016, but that's clearly an aim and a goal that they've been talking about ever since, I can't remember who wrote it, but the book about the demographics and the coming Democratic majority.
I think you're referring to Rui Teixeira.
Yeah, it was Rui Teixeira. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Population bomb. No, that wasn't it. Whatever it was.
Paul Ehrlich was the population bomb.
Yeah, that was right. But they laid it out. Say, well, the more immigrants come, the fewer white people there are going to be. White people aren't producing as many offspring as, say, like Mexicans and Indians and Chinese. These demographics are naturally going to vote against the racist white party of the GOP.
Okay, and by the way, we are edging into territory that has been called a conspiracy theory named the Great Replacement Theory, or the population replacement theory. I would just point out that, 5 years ago, it was being called a conspiracy theory in Great Britain until the records from the Labour Party were basically opened that said, oh, yeah, we were intentionally trying to bring immigrants in to turn the electorate more like.
Yeah. That's exactly what they're doing.
And
And they've
the
been doing
the
it here
funny thing
for
here is
decades.
the funny thing here is it's still like Tucker Carlson talked about it, I think, on his show. Oh, when he had a show, we'll get to that. He talked about it on his show, and of course, the next day, all the newspapers were Tucker Carlson embraces the population replacement conspiracy theory. Well, it's an odd sort of conspiracy theory when you have a guy like Rui Teixeira back in, and I think this was like 2012,
Like four or
well, yeah,
five, something
actually
like that.
earlier than that, in the early mid 2000s, who was saying, yeah, we'll have more immigrants. They'll come in, and they're coming from commie countries anyway, so they're naturally going to vote more for the left. So
Right.
we're just going to, with all of this immigration coming in, we're just going to outnumber the Republicans eventually. Plus, they have more kids, and therefore there'll just be more Democrat votes, and the Republican Party will be basically a rump party of the Deep South. Okay, that was his. That was
That
the
was his theory.
entire thesis of the book in 2004. And of course, the last words in the book is, yay, we win. It didn't exactly turn out that way.
No, it hasn't.
But, this idea that it's all a conspiracy theory. And look, there are certain things that I think are conspiracy theories because they're based on largely scientific impossibilities
Like
or
Scientology.
or yeah, but at the same time, there are a lot of things that are now being marked as conspiracy theories that are actually factually correct.
Yeah. Like everything that had to do with COVID.
Oh yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's interesting. Two things happened this week. One was this going back and just showing all of the people from Rachel Walensky to Tony Fauci to Donald Trump, and all the way through to Joe Biden and many others who were saying outright, if you take this vaccination, you won't get COVID.
Yep. And then you won't give it to anybody.
Yeah, and you can't pass it on. Indeed, that was the entire.
That was the whole point.
That was the whole point.
That was the entire point for the
mandates.
mandatory vaccination.
That you have to get it to protect other people. In
Right.
fact, if you don't get it, you're selfish because you are now preventing other people. And of
You're
course,
killing grandma.
my idea was always, well, wait a second. If you have your vaccination and
Yeah.
you can't get it, what
Right.
does it matter if I get mine? So just on a logical basis, that didn't make sense. But now we find out that these vaccines not only don't stop transmission, which everybody has to admit now, because, after booster number 5, there's somebody on Twitter that said, hey, turns out I got COVID again. And somebody responded, well, maybe the 6th one will do the job. and But if you had said, look, this is crazy, and by the way, people did say this is crazy, this is not happening, this is not happening transmission, you were shut down, you were called a conspiracy theorist, and you said, no, you can't even be allowed to speak publicly on this issue on social media or Twitter or wherever. We will shut you down.
Even if you were a doctor. Even like Scott Atlas got shut down. Who was
Jay
Bhattacharya.
Bhattacharya. A whole.
And then the guy at the CDC, who Fauci, we have come to find out, basically kind of took out of the loop and wouldn't let him talk about anything or be involved in any of the decision making because he was skeptical of the vaccines, how ethical they were, and whether or not we should be getting them to kids, which we now have some damn good evidence
That we shouldn't.
that we should not and never should have. And I never thought that was a good idea. That's why I didn't get my kids vaccinated. But I mean, everything about the skeptics' case proved to be true, but it was all called conspiracy theories. You were shut down. You were censored. You were treated like a pariah. It was a just wholesale propagandistic effort.
And that's become, by the way, the go-to now, right?
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
talking about something that I find uncomfortable. And I don't like the implications of what you're talking about. Because if it is true, of course, it means that many things I believe must be false. And since I believe them with a religious fervor, I can't accept that. So therefore, you must be talking conspiracy theories.
Right. Yeah. It can't be that maybe I need to check my premises. It has to be that what you're telling me cannot be right, because then everything else I built upon this theory, it falls apart. You take out that one card from my house of cards and it all falls down. And that's hard for people. I mean, that's hard for anybody. This isn't, that's just a normal reaction to having, a pillar of your belief system pulled out from under you. But it emphasizes that it's a belief system. Trust the science. Well, I'm pretty good at trusting science, especially when I see it. When I see the science that says, hey, wait a minute, maybe we should be checking this.
Yeah, and
I believe that silence.
And when you look at the actual Pfizer information that gets released, and by the way, it's now clear why they wanted to wait for 75 years to release this information. And you weren't, wait a second, nobody ever tested to see whether it stopped transmission? I mean, ever?
Right.
No, they didn't.
I mean, in that first year, I would think that'd be kind of up there and at the point of getting a vaccine, but I understand that it was a rushed job. It was on emergency authority, just trying to get something out there to help. And they checked for really prophylactic efficacy before anything else. And that's fine. I mean, I don't really have a problem with that. There was a rush to get it out. But in the years since, and it's been 3 years now, they hadn't bothered to even look at that. I mean, that seems to me rather reckless.
Well, not only that, we kind of skirted a few minutes ago around the idea of regulatory capture, although we didn't quite address it. And this to me seems like an area of clear regulatory capture.
Oh, absolutely. Especially since we know that Fauci and a lot of his buddies at the the AIADC or whatever it is, they had all these side deals with all these pharmaceutical companies and research companies. They're making a bundle of money off of all these drugs and research that they then foist onto the American public as if they are neutral arbiters. When they clearly aren't. There was huge conflicts of interest. And he still won't disclose those.
And conveniently, Pfizer and Moderna and Johnson & Johnson get a pass.
Yep, they get liability protection.
On liability protection, while at the same time receiving, certainly in the case of Pfizer and Moderna, who, by the way, prior to the COVID vaccine, had never produced a successful pharmacological drug ever. And I guess all that work paid off finally, because now they get billions in government contracts, not only from the United States, but certainly all over the Western Hemisphere, and even in Europe, and complete liability shield protection. Why? Interesting. How does that work? Why? And we haven't even addressed the issue of possible existing prophylactics that could be prescribed on an off-label basis that might have been helpful, primarily hydrochloroxyquine. I believe that's the proper pronunciation.
Yeah, I think so. Hydrochloroquine.
Hydrochloroquine. Okay, whatever. That, and of course, horse paste. Which you couldn't even talk about. Talking about that would get you banned. Well, there's no evidence that. Well, actually, there's mixed evidence, and even when they started to test it, because here's the whole point about the emergency use authorization, you can't get it if there is a prophylactic that works. You can only get that emergency use authorization if there is literally no other treatment that will help it.
Right.
Well, if you want to give your buddies at Pfizer and your own career a potential, late game strategy, Why not shovel $1 billion or $7 billion or whatever it is to Pfizer? And the only thing that you have to do is to ensure that there are no other treatments that might possibly work, and you have a
Right.
vested
Box out
interest.
the competition.
And you have a vested interest in ensuring that it doesn't work. And then you sponsor studies about it, of course, but the studies always show it doesn't work. And then you get in, I forget what was it was the We Together study on not hydrochloroquine, but it was on
Remdesivir.
no. We haven't got to remdesivir yet, but we
Yeah, I
will.
was going to say.
But on now I've forgotten the name of the drug, the horse paste.
Ivermectin.
Ivermectin, yes. Study on ivermectin said, didn't see any clinical effects from ivermectin. Oh, okay, not good news, because everybody had been saying ivermectin, had some efficacy, and there was some work being done overseas that indicated that might be true. And then you looked at that study, and you looked at the treatment protocol, and they were like seriously underdosing with ivermectin. They were like giving it too late and giving it at doses lower than what had been prescribed by people like Pierre Corey, the doctor who came up with the ivermectin treatment protocol and ultimately paid the price for that on social media. And so it's like, this study kind of looks like, since they ignored the treatment recommendations, that it was designed to fail.
Right.
And of course you can't prove that, but
then they used some like really small sample sizes. They had no control groups. I mean, there were a lot of weird things that went into all these studies that seemed like they were basically designed to come up with a specific answer.
But the bottom line is, you can't give your $7 billion contract to Pfizer or Moderna if there is another treatment out there that might be effective. So if you're, and this is the thing, if your intent is to do a good turn for the pharmaceutical companies who you purportedly regulate, but for whom you want a job whenever you leave your government position, and
then you're already getting paid from on the side.
Yeah. And of course, if you have some sort of sweetheart deal where they get to pay you for their patent, which, by the way, should be flatly illegal. I can't believe.
I don't know why it isn't.
I can't believe. I would
assume it is.
I mean, I can't believe that it's illegal. I simply can't believe that a U.S. government employee can receive a patent and receive royalty payments off of a patent produced while he was a U.S. government employee. That obviously seems like a work product of the United States government.
Exactly.
Which is not patentable by that individual employee. But
That's right.
Christ, there's so much we could talk about there, but we'll keep going on. You brought up remdesivir, and I was sort of slowly heading in that direction. The United Nations Health Organization, not every right-winger's favorite organization, said, you can't use remdesivir to treat COVID because, well, the side effects are pretty nasty.
It was pretty dangerous.
Yeah, the benefits just don't outweigh the known harms of giving remdesivir. And so the WHO said, nope, nobody used remdesivir. And thankfully, nobody did. Except, of course, for the United States, where the CDC...
It was the only thing that was allowed.
Yeah, made it the only treatment that you were authorized to give. Which was the other thing, by the way. Who is the CDC or any other government agency, not staffed by people who see patients, by the way? Who are they to tell clinicians from the top down, this is the treatment that you must give, and any other treatment that you give, well, you know what, if we get wind of that, we might take away your medical license. That's not the way any of this is supposed to work. And indeed, it's not the way it's worked in any pandemic in the past. Is the CDC is a clearinghouse for information from clinicians about what works and what doesn't work. And it's supposed to float its way up to the top so that the CDC can disseminate this information saying, hey, there's a bunch of doctors that are trying this. They're finding that it works. Maybe you can do this. That is just not how it worked with COVID. Everything was mandatory. Yeah, everything that wasn't mandatory was prohibited. And it all came from the top down. And at every step...
Guidance. Remember, CDC only issued guidance. And so,
And anyone who deviated from that guidance had their medical license threatened.
well, I don't know about that, but I do know that it put in the hands of all the state legislatures and governors to say, well, look, this is what the CDC says, so you're shutting down. No more gym for you, no more school, no more church, grocery store if you have to.
And at every step, every time somebody who came out and said the CDC is wrong about this, they shouldn't do this, this is wrong, there are other alternatives. We are imposing vaccines on people that use novel technologies that have not cleared phase 3. We don't exactly know what the result of these nanoparticles with these spike proteins. Pfizer's telling us, oh, don't worry, they'll stay in the arm muscle. Don't go anywhere. And every time somebody came out and said, I don't think that's true, it was conspiracy theorist, and everybody got banned. And by the way, if your ideas are so good that they, as we talked about earlier, that they have to be imposed by the force of the government, pardon me if I'm a little skeptical of your ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they should be able to withstand any scrutiny. And I would think I would have been, especially in an emergency situation, I would be inviting scrutiny so I could fine tune and get to the most effective, pharmaceutical that I was capable of creating. And the only way to do that is to get some peer reviewed and clinic observations. I mean, I can't see how it would work any other way, at least not effectively.
Yeah, what the CDC essentially said was, hey, we have this brand new disease. Humans have never caught it before. And we don't need your suggestions on how to treat it.
Yeah. And don't even think it didn't come from a bat.
Oh, yeah, that's another thing.
Or a pangolin or something.
Yeah, don't even... Clearly, this came from nature. There's no reason to even discuss any other possibility.
Even though it's so incredibly novel, I've never even really seen anything like this before.
Well,
clearly natural.
Here is the problem. I mean, everybody's arguing about the genetic signature and all of this. And I'm not a geneticist. I'm not capable of participating in that argument intelligibly. However, what I would point out, just from someone who is scientifically trained and who does have, at least greater than the average bear's ability to read a peer-reviewed paper, here's what we don't have in terms of evidence. In 2000, the 2000 is in late 90s, early 2000s, with the original SARS bird flu. When we saw the crossover, what we saw were intermediary species that began popping up in different areas. And so past that point, it gets hard to trace a particular location from where it came from, but it becomes obvious simply from the way that it entered the human community that it entered through animal intermediaries. So it had been put out through the sort of the animal population, and it had incubated there. And then we began seeing boom, 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 boom. We saw these cases begin to start popping up everywhere where people had contact with birds or whatever. And now we could say, okay, we're now seeing this infection begin crossing over into humanity, and we're seeing it in multiple areas, which is, by the way, what you would expect, because these animals are largely migratory. They do move around. They have fairly extensive ranges, so you would expect a more widespread among the population. What we saw with COVID was, okay, here are the first 100 cases, and they're all in Wuhan. It makes the zoonotic explanation less plausible simply because you would not expect it all to just appear in Wuhan, a city that also housed the Wuhan Dangerous Diseases Laboratory.
Two
of them. What you would expect is to see these crossover infections come in multiple areas in the larger range of whatever species of animal was the intermediary carrier. And that just didn't happen with COVID. So when you look at that and you say, okay, well, everybody who first got COVID for like the first 6 weeks were basically all in Wuhan, or people who had traveled to Wuhan and then returned to Shanghai or wherever. That makes the zoonotic explanation less plausible. And
Right.
of course, we'll never get to the bottom of it now, right? Because the Chinese were certainly not cooperative with any investigation. And at this point, 4 years down the line, there is no evidence that remains anywhere in China that this was anything other than a purely natural event. But it simply didn't follow what we've seen in previous animal crossover infections whenever those diseases came to humans. But of course, for a year, talking about that was a conspiracy theory that would get you thrown off of social media.
Oh yeah. I mean, it got people fired. It got them, kicked out of social media. I mean, it was just a full court press on anything that counteracted the narrative. And I think that the one thing that these wannabe tyrants learned from the whole COVID experience was how effective scaring citizens into compliance really was, how well it worked. You hold up the boogeyman, show some evidence of deaths and whatever else, and I have the solution, and only I have the solution. And don't you listen to anybody else, and I will defend you from them by shutting down their ability to be seen or heard. And you just listen to me, dear citizen, and I'll take care of you. Big Brother's on it.
And the really crazy thing about this is that the people who, for my entire lifetime, have, basically been saying, you can't trust the government, man. You can't do what they say. Don't trust anyone over 30 back in the 1960s. From then all the way up until sort of the mid-teens, these people were, we don't trust the government with anything. Look at what the CIA did, and look at what the FBI did with COINTELPRO.
MK Ultra.
Yeah, MK Ultra. These are the same people now who are
with more power,
who are just mouthpieces for the government.
Yeah.
It's amazing to read the New York Times or the Washington Post now compared to just compared to 20 years ago.
Yeah, the carrying of water for the government is absolutely amazing. And it's not just in the hypocrisy with like how they treated the whole Biden documents scandal versus how they treated the Trump one. I mean, that's kind of been de rigueur for a while now. But it's in what they won't tell you, and what they just poo-poo is no, this is no big deal. This is no worry. You should just trust the government. And people are like, yeah, why are you being so mean to the government? Like, what? They're the ones that got us into this mess. No. It's evil Republicans. It has to be greedy corporations. That's why we have inflation. Well, that's how inflation works.
Yeah. Who's it? Robert Reich today.
Oh God.
My favorite former cabinet secretary, although primarily because he's the only cabinet secretary that I've ever met and interviewed for an hour.
That interview is actually hilarious too.
Yeah, I think I posted that, didn't I? Back
I can't. You may have posted it on Q&O at some point. I know I've listened to it. I remember you sent it to me, and I just found it awesome, especially knowing because you did that back in like 94 or something.
He was still Secretary of Labor, so it would have been 95-ish or so, I guess.
Yeah,
it'd have been 90. Yeah, it was probably 95 or 96. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think when I listened to it, it was, I don't know, early 2000 teens, and having learned and seen a lot since then, just how incredibly wrong he could be, and yet so confident, just
Yeah.
so incredibly and friendly about it. Super friendly,
Oh, yeah.
confident.
He was a very friendly fella. And he took all of my questions with a good natured bonhomie and, explained why the very premises of my questions were
Oh yeah,
wrong.
Dale, you're missing the point here.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he was a very personable guy. I mean, on a one-to-one basis, he seems like a fella who'd be great to have a beer with.
Yeah, exactly.
But he's just wrong about everything. And today he tweeted something to the effect of Exxon just came out with their profits for the quarter. And with these excessive profits, it looks like for the year, Exxon is going to be socking away $33 billion. This sort of corporate greed is what's causing inflation. Okay, first of all, $33 billion would fund the United States government for 10 hours?
Yeah, not a full day.
Maybe. Certainly not a full day.
I think it's like something around 45 to 50 billion a day, something like that.
Yeah, so you would get a half a day out of Exxon's entire yearly output. So,
If that's truly gross, and that's probably gross profits.
yeah.
So, and it's a whole number. It's just a gross number. It's not a percentage, so it doesn't really show you, what their margin is, how much they truly made, and how much they have to actually pay out. Not to mention what's taxable.
By the way, your mention of margins just reminded me of The Big Short. And that one line in The Big Short when the guy asked him, he says, "You're from the bank. What's your margins?" "That's a nice shirt. Do they make it for men?" And don't ask me about my margins. Although I would say that Exxon's margins have generally held pretty steady at about a dime per dollar, so 10% ish.
I mean,
Which,
that's
by the way, that's
good.
pretty nice.
Yeah, very
10%.
nice.
I mean, if you're a retailer like Walmart, you're happy to make three.
Yeah. Or if you're
Profit
a
margin.
gas station owner, you're happy to make like 1.5 to 2%.
Yeah. So I mean, 10% is great, but the problem with inflation, I mean, is it the fact that, and by the way, I can't even figure out
I've never understood that
how those
argument
two
either.
dots connect.
Yeah.
Okay, Exxon made, let's say $40 billion is around. Exxon made $40 billion last year. So your prices are higher. Okay, are you saying that Exxon is just engaging in monopoly behavior and charging me more for a gallon of gas simply because they can? And if they're doing that, presumably, since gas prices are fairly stable across the board at every gas station, are you saying that all of these oil companies are now engaging in a collusion to price as a cartel in violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act?
You would have to be.
Because I mean that's the only possible way it could be happening. So is that what you were saying is happening? Because you're not explaining it.
Because it doesn't make any sense. I mean, and it doesn't. And let's be honest, it's all the same gas. It comes from the refinery in these pipes. It comes up, and I've seen that. I've actually seen this.
And by the way, in California, there's only 4 refineries in the entire nation that can produce gas for California.
That's
so
right.
Every single gas station is selling gas from those 4 refineries.
Right. And then they do the additives and stuff to make it their brand when it gets to the gas station. Or maybe when they pick it up, they can do it in the tank. But when it comes up, they have these little balls that float in there to tell you whether, which octane it is. And so you start seeing the blue balls come along like, okay, shut it off. Okay, that's all for regular. And now we're going to go to 89 test. And, and then every single gas company comes to that place to pick up the gas, and then they do the magic to make it their brand. So it's all the same freaking gas.
and by the way, while you're telling me that Exxon is making excess profit and which is making prices go higher, which, okay, why don't you also explain why, $30 trillion in government debt is not in fact doing that?
Wait, but that's apples and oranges
There we see.
because
Again,
Exxon can't
that's
print money.
the Robert Reich response is, well, I think you misunderstand how that system works, Dale.
Two totally different things, Dale. One's a government, one's a company. You don't get a price on your senator, do you? Well,
Well, it depends on who I am.
actually, that'd be awesome. That's what somebody should do. What, like, what it costs you as a voter to keep voting for this person to be in office? You're just like a floating symbol over their heads while they're, scanning through the through the gallery. This shows up per voter, $10,800 per year. You know,
Well, I've always liked the idea that, and I think this may be apocryphal, but it's always been attributed to Adolf Coors at the Coors Brewery, where people would go to work there. He'd pay them their paychecks, but before they could leave, he could say, okay, well, now you got to go by that window because now you got to pay your taxes to the government. So here's your check, but now you got to, give this money back to the government. And the idea was that, every week they would see how much money they were, giving to the government and how much it was coming out of their check because he was forcing them to pay every week, which, by the way, I'm not sure would actually be legal. I think you're required to do withholding.
you are.
But
Maybe not back then. Maybe he's the reason that it became.
But, I have to wonder whether that would work today in a situation where fully half of the taxpayers just don't pay federal income tax.
Yeah.
Or pay very nominal amounts.
Well, it's hard to quantify because when they're getting subsidies in different ways that are seen and unseen, they may not really know. And if they've got a job and they see that you're making $15,000, there are going to be taxes coming out of your paycheck. You're going to get it all back, and then plus some, up to I think it's around 50 or 60 grand, and that's just on federal. And depending on how many kids you have, blah blah blah.
By the way, I'm sorry, but I'm getting hugely distracted by the sun that is leaking through the Venetian blinds and
ouch.
Making these dots on.
Oh, I can see the little glare there.
So I'm not sure where I guess it's coming from right there. Yeah. It's coming from the little holes in my Venetian blinds.
But anyway, yeah, I don't know how well that will work because the whole process has become so opaque on purpose. It was like I was saying to my wife the other night. I was like, it pisses me off. Okay, time to pay your taxes. We know what the number is, but here's a bunch of forms you have to fill out to take a guess.
By the way, do they know what the number is? Because every year, all of the media organizations call up the IRS with tax questions, and they say, okay, well, I've got, whatever the complicated situation is, and the IRS doesn't know the answer either. And if they talk to three people, they get three different answers from the IRS. If you have a tax code, the entire tax code is basically now little more than a subsidized industry for tax accountants and tax lawyers.
In a lot of ways, that's true. And the corporate code is even worse, especially if you're international, because there's no lobby to make that more clearer. At least with our taxes, just regular income taxpayers, we have some lobbies that push for clear rules and for fairer rules. You go into any kind of international tax, business that has manufacturers overseas and distributors overseas, and then other things here, it becomes a nightmare. And none of the answers are clear. And they're the ones that get audited the most because that's where the government makes the most money per case. A lot more bang for the buck.
As I get older, I begin to have a certain admiration for the average European income tax system, which is basically like if you make less than $24,000 a year, you're not going to pay anything in taxes. You're poor. If you make anything over $24,000 a year, depending on how much you make, you're going to fall into one of three tax brackets: 40, 50, 60%. And there's not going to be any deductions. There's not going to be any of this home mortgage interest rate bullshit or any of this other stuff. You owe us 40, 50, or 60% of your income. That's just the bottom line. And we're just going to take it right out of your check. So however much you get paid, we're just going to take 40, 50, or 60% out of it. Now, if you get other income from other sources, not a job, basically, okay, fine. We'll take, well, at that point, it's probably 60%, right? So we'll just take 60%. You just tell us how much you made, and you send us 60% of it. And tax day in most European countries is literally filling out a postcard that says, yeah, that's exactly how much I made. Yeah, you did take that much out. So we're even Stevens, and you send it in. So for most people, tax day is nothing because tax day is every payday. We can quibble about their rates and how extortionate they are and whatever. But the fact is,
but system-wise,
everybody,
it's a lot better.
Everybody understands.
And that's how ours used to be.
Yeah. But now we've fallen for this Bernie Sanders fallacy.
Yep.
That millionaires aren't paying their fair share of taxes. Which, what is a fair share of my income that I am obligated to give to you? We won't even get to the whole taxation is theft argument, but it is, certainly in terms of income taxation. That's not how millionaires can't pay for everything. Even the Europeans realize that. People in Bernie Sanders, a man who I'm sure would love to have a Western European standard of social safety net. And by the way, there's nothing that prevents us from having that Western European style social safety net. All we have to Jews, we don't actually, but their safety nets are far more comprehensive.
They are more comprehensive, but they also pay a lot more in taxes.
But yes, they do get what they pay for. Well, I'm not sure that is true. However, they pay for a more comprehensive system, and that's what they get. We can have that same sort of system. All it will require is European tax rates. And
they also have freer enterprise systems in many of those states.
And there is no Democrat who is going to say, look, I'm going to give you all of these goodies. I'm just going to take 40% of your income. Well, maybe 60%. We'll figure that out later. The fact is, half of your income I get. And then look all the goodies I'm going to give you. But then it stops becoming free goodies, right? It stops becoming, rich people. There are so many billionaires that they can basically supply the $5.5 to $6 trillion a year that the government needs to operate. And Americans have been sold on this fantasy for so long. We'll never have a European social welfare system because there's no possible way we can pay for it with our current tax code.
Yeah, well, and they've also been sold on on this concept that we can help your lives be better by incentivizing you to do the right things, by giving you certain tax credits here and doing certain tax credits over there. And we'll, if you live your life the way that we think you should, you'll pay almost nothing in taxes. It'll be great.
If only you were smart enough to live your own life the way that you wanted. It's the Bill Clinton thing, right? I remember from 1994.
Yeah, we give you the money, but
1994, which, I've worked harder than anything in my life trying to give you a middle-class tax cut. But I just can't be sure that you'd spend it the way you need to spend it. Thanks, Bill. It's none of your goddamn business how I spend my tax cut.
And that's the whole point to this.
It's my business how you spend my tax payments. It's not your business how I spend my tax cut.
That's the thing with this Inflation Reduction Act, which is really just the Green New Deal. It's got nothing to do with reducing inflation. In fact, it will increase inflation. This concept that we need to move to a green economy. There's going to be all these wonderful jobs. We need to leave behind that dirty, disgusting gasoline engine. We need to get rid of coal plants and oil, even though we never, ever, ever can do either. Maybe eventually coal, if we ramped up the nuclear, we could probably do that.
Oh, well, by the way, it gets worse because Jennifer Granholm came out this week and she says, you know what? I support the idea of every military vehicle being electric by 2036.
Oh, my God.
Okay, first of all, that simply can't happen.
No, it's not even possible. Look, we've made some really great advances in electric vehicles. There's some damn powerful electric vehicles. I'm not going to lie about that. But when you're talking about heavy machinery, and then here's the other thing, if it breaks down in the field, what are you supposed to do with an electric vehicle? Either it's got juice or it doesn't have juice. I get the whole thing. There's fewer moving parts. That's great. But
it also means that there's almost no unit maintenance that can be done to repair it.
Right. So you have no way to really maintain it, and you have no way to fix it in the field if you have to.
Everything that breaks down is depot maintenance. Literally everything.
Yep. Yeah, I wouldn't. I think that would be absolutely. It's like.
Oh, and by the way, let's not even talk about the number of vehicles you'll need.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
To do,
and actually,
to
yeah.
do that.
And then how would you even get the batteries to run all these? Much less the juice.
And the juice to recharge them all.
Yeah.
It's this exercise in fantasy, which again,
it's all magical thinking.
Yeah, well, you know, it's like modern monetary theory. Well, the government can never go bankrupt because they can always just print money to pay off their debts.
Yeah, they may not go bankrupt, but the rest of us will.
Yeah, well, that's just and the other idea, and there's a lot of this, by the way, where if A is true, then logically B must also be true, but we never want B to be true, right? So, okay, if the idea is that, the government can just print all the money it wants and just pay off the debt by printing money. Okay, then logically that means the government can pay its day-to-day bills simply by printing money, which by inference means you don't actually need me to pay taxes at all because you can just print the money to buy anything that you want. Well, no, now. That's not how. But it has to be. Your assertion can't be true without all of the logical corollaries also being true. It was like, what's her name? Whoopi Goldberg on The View coming up saying, parents have a right to give their children gender-affirming surgeries. Okay. Let's assume arguendo that is true. Then what is also true is that parents have the right to choose not to do so. Mm-hmm. Because rights imply that I have a choice. I can make a decision without coercion from outside. So that means that any law that you want to pass, like in California or Washington or Minnesota, that says I am now obligated to give my children gender-affirming medical treatment, that must also be a violation of my right as a parent. I can't have a right to do only the thing that you command me to do.
Right.
I don't know what you call that, but that's not a right.
Yeah. The thing I love too lately about this whole gender affirming surgery.
By the way, we're doing well for not having a single freaking topic to talk about.
Is, this all kind of started with, well, there is no gender binary. Gender has nothing to do with sex. Okay. Then why is gender affirming surgery always a sex change from one to the other? If gender has nothing to do with sex, that doesn't make any sense. That a sex change would be the cure. I know these people are not good on logical consistency, but it baffles the mind how somebody can truly believe this stuff. I mean, I get that some of these people don't believe it at all. It's just another wedge to push. But some of these serious activists really believe this stuff. And that's why they want to shut down. You ask them that question, I'm going to get punched in the face, right?
Well, look,
I'm going to get hit with an umbrella and maced and whatever else.
Yeah, this week there was a this whole thing that's been going on, this whole kerfluffle about the Equal Rights Amendment, which
what the hell was that?
Okay, by the way, the ERA is dead. It had
been dead for a long time.
It had 7 years to get ratified.
They even extended that.
Yeah. It didn't. It's dead as fried chicken. So I don't know where we're coming, because now I guess the argument is, well, Texas technically did ratify it, and then, all right, whatever. The fact is, if gender is a social construct, and I can choose my own gender,
right,
then what is the point of an Equal Rights Amendment? Because if there is
nothing.
Yeah, if there is no objective definition of what a gender is, if it's all just a social construct that I can put on like a coat on a cool day, then why would we need such an amendment? It is an amendment to protect what is essentially a legally indefinable characteristic, because the concept of gender now depends on my personal assessment of what my gender is. And so I can either be that gender or not be. That's all up to me. What is it then that I'm protecting?
That's exactly right.
And by the way, what is the legal definition of the thing I am protecting? Because the thing I am protecting is an entirely self-selected personal
and it can change
assessment
from day to day.
That changes from day to day. How would I enforce it? Against whom would it be enforced? And what would be the acts that would violate the equal protection of that gender?
I thought you were a man. When I treated you that way that you're complaining about, I thought you were a man.
Yeah, I just don't. Again, it goes back to this religious mode of thinking, which is the most dangerous thing that has happened in our society in my lifetime. This complete unmooring of belief from any sort of rational, objective standard that can be argued to this whole feelings-based thing, which is largely based in religion. I think we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, the idea that the type of political debates that we have now compared to the ones that we had in the 1970s and 80s. It's fascinating seeing Milton Friedman in 1977 sitting there talking to some liberal professors at some college campus at some event, and they were passing back statistics back and forth and trying to find sort of the factual basis for their particular positions. Well, that's all just blah, 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 blah noise today. Nobody wants to sit and listen to that debate.
Oh, even Milton Friedman, I remember this one talk he gave at, and it was, I can't remember who the other professor was, but more of a Keynesian professor. It was back in the 70s. He was at the University of Chicago. A very bright lefty guy got up and asked some very good, intelligent questions that made you had to think about it. I mean, Milton didn't have to, because he knew what the answer was, but he just very cheerfully, laid out the case why, okay, well, if you're thinking that, then this would also have to be true, right? Well, and then this would have to be true. It was an actual discussion. And this guy was obviously very bright, who got up and asked the question. He was a student at University of Chicago. He was clearly intelligent, come up with a very intelligent question that he thought would point to the rightness of his position. And it wasn't so much that Friedman, disproved what he thought, as that he laid out why his thinking was incomplete, that he hadn't really come up with everything he needed to come up with to push that line of thinking. And it was fascinating. It was edifying. It was great. Now we get either people who completely agree with you or people who just shout at you.
Yeah, well, the difference is that in 1980, we could have had this discussion between what Ronald Reagan called the tax and spend Democrats. The tax and spend thing does work for Western Europe. Now, it
Right.
works because they have a general societal agreement that they would rather pay higher taxes and get a large level of social support from the government. They recognize that the trade-off, of course, is that no matter how free the economy is, the fact that the government is extracting that much value out of it is going to reduce job growth. It is going to tend to increase unemployment. And it's certainly going to increase the cost of employment across the board, which means that their societies are going to be, on the whole, poorer than societies in America.
And that's been true. I mean, not that they're poor, but a regular rate of growth, GDP growth in European countries is somewhere between like 2 and 5% per year.
But we can have that debate because that debate is about the values we want to have as a society and what we're willing to.
And we can sort of map out policies to outcomes.
And we can recognize the trade-offs. Now, Milton Friedman, of course, for him, that would have been an acceptable trade-off because his highest value was a society that produces the greatest amount of wealth because he tended to think that over the long term, it was better for everyone, even if it had greater income inequality across the board. But that's fine. We can have that policy argument because that's an argument about the kind of society that we want to create based on the known trade-offs between policy differentials.
But you're working within a parameter there, right?
We're working within a shared framework that everybody understands what the
contract
facts are.
lens.
Now we're talking about what the best outcome is and whether, it is better to have a poorer society with less income inequality and a greater social support network, but with it higher unemployment and a lack of social mobility. I mean, all of those come with that package.
Yep.
Or economic mobility. All of that comes with that package. We know what that package is. We can argue now, and it becomes a choice of trying to convince people which of those two packages to buy. And there's the Milton Friedman package, which is society as a whole may be richer. You may, in fact, become very, very rich. You may fail and become very, very poor. And there's not going to be a lot of support for you either way. And you're just kind of on your own, but nobody's going to bother you. Because in the other society, people are going to bother you. The government is going to bother you to a certain extent. In this society, it's not. And what society do you want to live in? Okay, if we can have that debate. Now, the side that I would want to win that debate and the side that would actually win that debate might be two different things, but at least we're all debating within the same framework.
Right.
That's not the debate today. The debate today is, you believe in policy X? You must have sex with goats.
Right.
I don't know how to. I don't know how to make the other than no. There's no.
Yeah, there's no.
No counter to that argument because it's not an argument. It's simply
not an argument.
It's simply a moral. Well, it's an ad hominem, but it's simply it's a moral assertion. You believe something different than I believe. That makes you a worse human being.
You're amoral, and this is all from
amoral at best.
Yeah. You're what that is a result of, or what preceded that is years and years and years of poisoning the well politically, and there being little counteraction to that. Most people just want to be left alone. Like, I'm not a racist. I'm not anti-immigrant. I just whatever. I can't talk to you, so I don't talk to you. And I don't say anything. And then all of a sudden these loudmouths, and I think it's a minority, a very, very vocal minority who push this stuff.
Yeah. Here's my problem with the vocal minority argument is not that it is untrue, because I believe that it is true. It is the fact that the vocal minority is the minority that are controlling the primary positions of cultural and economic power.
Yeah, that's right. the uniparty.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, our ruling class, our political class. Yeah, they're the ones. You remember there used to, I don't know if this term still exists, but there was the Gang of 500, which is supposedly these 500 most influential people, in the Acela corridor, essentially between DC and New York. They go to the same parties. They're from both, yeah, both Democrats and Republicans. They go to all the same parties. They go to all the same events. They donate to the same charities. They see each other all the time. They've gone to the same schools, and their chatter is what influences the conventional wisdom every day. It's what drives news cycles. It's what drives interest in any particular event. Maybe that's expanded a little bit beyond the 500, but there's certainly a cabal. I can't think of a better word that tries to and successfully does control the narrative. Damn whatever reality is saying and what's happening to you on the ground. Doesn't even matter what they show and what the actual facts are. They find a way to spin the narrative and make it all seem like you really need us in charge. You people can't control yourselves.
It's kind of a shell game that we're being forced to watch, which is you've got these, basically the people who run all of our institutions have all bought into this DEI narrative. Mm-hmm. So whether it's in Hollywood or academia or big business, they've all bought into this. And there is people who are not in the elite status, people who don't have blue check marks, but people who really, really want to believe this DEI stuff anyway, because it is part of their concept of self. It's what makes them a moral person. It's literally their religion, because God knows they don't believe in, God. So what happens is, X event occurs. Someone says something they shouldn't have or does something they shouldn't have done. The people who are not the blue check marks, but who've bought into the DEI stuff, now make a complaint. The people who have bought into DEI, who've in fact imposed it on their companies, now they can say, see, you've done something to upset the customers. They're all upset now. We're going to have to fire you because previously you were, for whatever reason, untouchable, or we made a lot of money off of you, but now we have an excuse to fire you, and because you've strayed from the narrative. And so we can now pretend that it is coming from this popular groundswell of, what may be 20% of the population. It's coming from this popular groundswell, and now we have to get rid of you. It's like this self-reinforcing thing where the elites use the people who aren't elite, but who are vocal and who will complain to do what they want to do anyway, under the guise of, this has popular support. And so it starts to look like there is this popular support for all of the CRT/DEI, whatever the goddamn acronym for it happens to be on any given day. And thus they reinforce the narrative. And, we've seen this in Hollywood, and the result that you get out of it, I'm not sure is the result that you want, but we saw this in Hollywood. We had all of these people, and there's a Nerdrotic on YouTube did this hilarious thing of all of these actresses over the years thanking Harvey Weinstein for their careers when they got their Oscars, to, of course, Harvey Weinstein now being persona non grata. And by the way, all these other people who just got shuffled off with him, mm-hmm. and all these women who are now directing all of these movies, none of them are making any money. And the messages in those movies don't appear to be movies that people want to go see or to purchase. Yeah. But
bomb after bomb after bomb.
But it certainly reinforces their conception of self, that we are just doing, not God's work, because there isn't one.
Gaia's work.
But Gaia's work, the universe's work, whatever the work is that makes us an ally.
Right.
We're now doing that work. And I don't know, is the idea that the American public will sooner or later come around and just start giving them money again? Or do they
Yeah, I don't
not
know.
have
If
to make
they're going to
money?
get guilted into going to seeing these stupid movies. If you know, I don't know. It doesn't seem to be a very well planned venture. They certainly seem to be willing to lose a lot of money over it.
Well,
But
look at what's her name at Disney, Kathleen Kennedy, who runs
oh
the
my
who
God, how
runs
much has she screwed that
who
up?
runs Star Wars.
Yeah.
Look, you paid George Lucas what, $6 billion for this property, and look, I'm not saying that the 3 prequel movies were good. I'm not saying that George Lucas hasn't fumbled the ball a couple of times. But the fact is, you had an enormously valuable franchise. And by the way, with Rogue One, it looked like you were going to do something with it. And then it just all went downhill from there.
Quickly.
And, we've got to have our. And by the way, they hate it when you call Rey a Mary Sue, but she is a Mary Sue. She has no training. She's grew up on a junkyard planet, and she's good at everything. Oh,
Right.
You need somebody to use a lightsaber? I'm your chick. Oh, somebody's got to fly the Millennium Falcon? Move over, Chewie. I'm here. Okay, anything that the script calls for her to do, she is an expert at doing. There was no reason for her to go seek out Luke and to try to get Jedi training. Why? You're already bad enough to beat Kylo Ren. Why do you need any training from Luke? Who, a character, by the way, they destroyed.
Yeah.
Fine. Ultimately, people aren't going to come watch those movies. And I think they're kind of learning that. I mean, look at what Captain Marvel 2.
Oh my God, Captain Marvel was bad enough.
Which became The Marvels, which became a movie that may be The Marvels if we ever decide to release it, because they've now 3 times delayed the release date on it. Maybe they're learning, but I
don't think so.
I don't know. It doesn't appear that.
I remember
way to
that
me.
we saw this happen back, a few years ago, maybe as many as 10 years ago, with the sci-fi fantasy writers and
oh yeah, that is true. The John Scalzi's and the commies basically took over the science fiction writers of America.
and it was all over the awards and all that crap.
Yeah, they run it like their own personal dog kennel. So anybody who gets a Yugo has to pass all of the required, DEI checklists,
And it simply destroyed that community.
And by the way,
It's fractured it.
There are now 2 science fiction writers communities now in the world. There is your Rob Crozy, Larry Correa science fiction community, who are incredibly based. And by the way, they're selling books. And they're
and Larry Correa, holy crap! I don't know how he spits out as many books as he does. But they're doing well because they're writing what people want to read. They're not shoving political correctness or any of this other crap down people's throats. They're just creating these cool fantasy worlds and coming up with cool stories and telling them, which, I mean, that's hard to do. That's not exactly easy. These people have a talent for it and they do it, and it works.
Yeah. Well, the sad thing is that Scalzi used to tell stories that people wanted to read as well. And things change, I guess. Once you what is it? Go woke, go broke is the phrase. I'd actually like to see it happen.
Yeah.
But I think when you have as much capital as Hollywood, it probably takes a while to get to the go broke part.
Well, Anheuser-Busch is definitely trying to lead the way.
Oh, yeah. We didn't even get to there yet. Look, Michael, that's all the time we have for this week. You have a great week. We'll talk to you next time.
You too. Bye.
You've been listening to the Observations podcast for Sunday, the 30th of April, 2023. As always, we appreciate the fact that you listen to the podcast. Hope you will be back next time to listen again or watch again, or watch and listen, however it is that you access the podcast. Re-access it in a similar fashion in the next week. Until then, have a great week. So long.